Hey everybody, how's it going? I've got a great guest this evening for you. Someone that a lot of you are probably familiar with. Don the Pleb is somebody who I've been on his channel a few times. So if you want to see any of our prior discussions, you should definitely go check those out. And Don runs a YouTube channel, and I think he's on a couple different other platforms. Thanks for joining me, man.
Absolutely welcome. And sure enough, I'm all over the place.
Yeah, I went ahead and linked your Twitter, which I think has got the link to a couple other your different channels and platforms, and then I got the YouTube channel link down there. Everybody should definitely check that out. But I think Don is a good person to talk to because we both, I think, exist kind of in a similar sphere. We're both people who are on the right and looking at things from kind of outside the normal conservative perspective, but we also represent kind of, I think, opposite ends of kind of maybe how people think we should approach what kind of this new coalition on the right is planning to do, like what the tactics and strategy should be. And so I think it's good to have these discussions because we kind of come we have similar interests. We're definitely friendly and allies, but I think we kind of approach things differently, and so it's definitely good to touch base and kind of and approach these issues from both sides. So the reason that we had this particular talk is that Don had saw something that I said on Twitter. I think I was JD Vance was saying that the Ford Foundation, the Ford Foundation was doing something crazy and yet again undermining America. And JD Vance said something to the effect of like, "Why haven't we just seized the endowment of the Ford Foundation?" And I was like, "Okay, based. That's a good start." But I think Don had some objections to that, and so I wanted to go ahead and let him voice that, and we'll kind of talk a little bit. Start out the talk with kind of the strategy and tactics and how people should be approaching maybe social media and journal engagement with politics. So Don, go ahead and take it away there, man.
So, this sort of just boiled down to the question of why is it good to seize the assets of one open borders junkie and give it to another one? And not to pave over your reply here, but it was basically, well, we don't like Biden, but, to hell with Ford. And that, I mean, I thought about this a lot, surprisingly, over the last day, and I don't think it's going to help us any to try to tear down the Ford Foundation, for example. And if it was just remove their endowment versus you know seize their assets, I'd have a lot different views on this. I think, and I think the problem there is that JD Vance had said seize their assets. I am all for stopping them, the left as a whole and their various institutions, from incestuously funding each other perpetually forever. Stop them from being able to tax, well, let's be honest, us, right, productive people in society, and give that to other leftist foundations who then give it back to the government so they get a bigger endowment from the
Right.
government to the leftist foundation over and over, ad infinitum. But if you seize their assets, the history of this is pretty bad. It looks a lot like the government now has an interest in how those organizations are funded. This is how we got the Leaf and all those other ridiculous electric cars immediately post 2008, is the bailouts, where the government came in and said, well, we gave you money, so now we own a part of you. And so now, make electric cars and do other ridiculous woke crap. And I see that as the pitfall we are going to fall into almost immediately if we play the seize assets game.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying there because so I think this it helps to partition this into a couple things because first we have like the actual practical stuff, which is like, will anyone in the government be seizing assets or endowments or anything from the Ford Foundation? The obvious answer to that is laughably no, right? Like
Likely not.
right, not even like not likely not. Like I am more likely to win three consecutive Powerballs than we are to seize the assets of the Ford Foundation, right?
Probably.
So when we say something like this, I think it's good to understand that there is some hyperbole in there, right? This is talking about something that is obviously not going to happen in the short term. So I think there's like a tone thing involved here. So when we do talk about it, I see what you're saying. It makes perfect sense. What would be the value of taking that money from the NGO and just depositing it in the hands of other people who hate us, right? You're just rearranging Titanic deck chairs.
Pretty much, yeah.
Right. And that makes perfect sense. So when we say something hyperbolic like that, I think it's not implying that this is something that would be immediately advantageous um, for the cause or whatever, for the right, because obviously the people in charge who would be doing the seizing theoretically are not on your side either, right? And so that's like you said, it's just a moving of funds. It's not an actual. You're not actually taking a real scalp there. Not that these people would do that anyway. So that makes perfect sense. I think when we say those things, I think when you're seeing more and more people, guys like JD Vance, guys like the gentleman at the Federalist, what's his name, Sean, I can't remember his last name, but you're seeing more mainstream conservatives say things like this. And I think the reason you're hearing it more is that conservatives are becoming more and more aware that their complete abandonment and understanding of the use of government power has left them defenseless. Not that implementing it now would be good because basically all the government institutions are captured, but understanding that the way they were captured is that the left was completely willing to do this when the right was basically unilaterally disarming itself. And so it's not so much an acknowledgement of like what we should be doing right now to solve the problem, because this tool, even if it was available to us, which it's absolutely not, as you point out, doesn't actually solve the problem. I think it's more an acknowledgement of the right understanding some of the nature of power and maybe some of the folly it has had by denying itself certain tools on kind of a principle basis that it could have used previously, that they have neglected, and now has left them in the spot that they're in. So I think it's less about immediately solving the problem and more about acknowledgement of, look, this is how football is played, and you can either learn to win or you can just suffer an amazing string of losses.
Uh, Not unreasonable. I would suggest that the first thing that we all ought to do, if that was, if this is, we're going to try and speed learn at a rate that is unfathomable how to use power to to Conan these people, crush our enemies, see them driven before us, and hear the lamentations of their women
Mm-hmm.
with penises. So maybe not, but if we're going to do that, we really ought to stop trying to reinvent the wheel. And that is a giant problem that all of us have, right? Because the correct answer, if you were going to do this, is you take you go and get one person in the Ford Foundation and you charge them as aiding and abetting a murder. You file a RICO case against the entire Ford Foundation and then charge them all with the Logan Act on top of that. And you shut the whole thing down by walking out everybody in chains. And you could do that based on what's already there. You don't need to come up with something wild or crazy. You just need to know what the rules already are. And I can hear the objections already. Who's going to prosecute that? Who's going to do it? Well, presumably, if you had a capability at any point, at any time, to just seize the Ford Foundation's even endowment, for that matter, you would have some power that you could exert to do this. And there's good reason for that outside of, just that it's already there and stop trying to reinvent the wheel. And that is, every time that we go reinvent the wheel, we're very horrifically bad at it. And we should have learned this a long time ago. Is every time the right comes in and goes, has power for 5 seconds and tries to create something that's going to be helpful in the future, the first thing you find out is that the left's like, hey, good looking out. Thank you. I can really use that thing that you just did.
Yeah, well, and that's so. This is the eternal battle, right? Is the right gets a little bit of power, and it immediately wants to do something with that power. It's desperate for a win. It's desperate for a scalp. The left gets power, and the first thing they do with it is accumulates more power. And so the right is like a guy with $5 who's usually broke, desperately trying to spend it. The left is always investing that $5 and building wealth and just crushing the right every time it gets $5.
Oh, yeah.
And so part of our problem, as you're stating there, is the apparatus, right? And this is something that you and I have gotten into a number of times in your channel. Like I told people, if you want to see kind of we've spent a couple hours talk about this, so we're not going to dive a whole super deep into this the entire talk. But if you want to see kind of the where we've been in this talk before, you can go check those out on Don's channel. But basically, from my corner, from kind of the reactionary corner, the answer is the system is set up to defeat the right. It's entirely engineered by our enemies pretty much at every turn to make it impossible for the right to actually grab the levers of power and steer the behemoth the other direction. And so the answer is you have to play outside of the behemoth. You have to either wait for it to fall over, or you need to find avenues outside of the system to harass the system to kind of get it to break itself down and kind of fall apart. Because the system, it's like sitting down in a casino where the slots are rigged against you 95% of the time, and you're like, but it's the only game in town, so I guess I'll sit down and play. The only way to win is to stop playing. As where I think you kind of come more from there are still political avenues, there are still ways inside the system to kind of work small or go big, or kind of turn the ship of state in our direction if we just would follow certain organizational principles or different tactics. Is that right, or is that close?
Sort of. My general method of dealing with the system as it sits is probably best summed up by DEF CON, which is to say that no one at DEF CON is using Windows the way that it was intended to be used, but they are using Windows. And if we're not looking at any interaction we have with the system as us being intentionally malicious in a way that breaks it. And you can call that accelerationism if you want, but I'm not saying that what we should do is go out there and forcibly transgenderize every child on the planet or the country or whatever quantity of government we're talking about. On the other hand, things that make it cause itself problems, because it doesn't actually have unlimited resources, just simply time is something that it doesn't have an unlimited quantity of. And so the more you can make it even invest time, because what are we going to do? Make it invest dollars that it will print more of? That's probably not a great idea. But the more you can get it to fight itself while we do anything productive, the better off we'll be. And the only exception to that is supremely localized things, right? There's some hypothetical possibility that we could reach out and touch governorships, but too much bigger than a mayor of a small town, and you are going to run into problems.
Yeah, and I think obviously, like you said, there is. I always tell people this: if there's something you can do to protect your community, if there's something you can actively do that is going to benefit your children, your family, your church, whatever that is, I'm not decrying that, like 100%. Like if there are small towns, like you said, that you can set up, and I mean we can see some of this with with the COOF, right? Different states, vastly different qualities of life depending on who's running them, right?
Definitely.
So we can't pretend that who's in charge has zero effect, that the system is just completely total, and it doesn't matter at all who is in those places. But at the same time, I think there's wisdom in, like you said, realizing that there's only so much that gets done at the local level, and kind of the real ship of state where the big power lies is pretty much untouchable at this point, because the only political avenue you have for opposition is a joke. Like the GOP is just the outer party. It's just going the speed limit. It's just progressivism going the speed limit. So the idea that these people are going to ever be formed into something that can seriously um, defeat or wrestle away the pretty much total control progressives have on institutions, from everything from intelligence agencies to corporations to education to media, I think is pretty naive. And so I do think the local control you're talking about is still valuable, but I think when we talk about the more national stuff, I think that's when understanding, and obviously, like, then saying, well, we should seize the Ford Foundation does seem to counteract that. But when people say stuff like that, like I said, I think because it's so hyperbolic, because it's so ridiculous, the idea that the current administration or anyone in the GOP would actually do that. I think what we're really saying is, when the right, whenever the time comes, has the ability to once again exert power on a larger scale, it can't be afraid to treat its enemies the way the left has, because it needs to understand that someone is going to drive the ship, and if it isn't you, it's going to be them.
That's fair. Certainly, it is a lesson that, God forbid, we ever have any real power that we can exert. We should learn. I don't know that I agree with the minutia of some takes, but the premise is good, right? The regardless of whatever you think of the idea that we have exploded McCarthy into this idea that he was, I don't know, some titanic giant of the right using power is ridiculous. There was lists that say that you couldn't be a communist and be in Hollywood. Good.
Yeah, yes.
What do you want me to
Yes.
say?
Based guy saying yes. Yeah.
And this is the kind of thing where the government didn't actually do anything of any serious value there, and had they, I think we'd be in a better position, and that's totally fine by me. If the things that you value in this world, and God forbid you use the word ideas, but the intangibles that you value in this world are under very direct attack by some other intangible, again, God forbid you use the word idea, then you have to defend them. And I think this is a thing that we have wholly abandoned, because as soon as you say, it happened to Trump, it happens to me. You said fight. That means get a gun. Well, it turns out you can fight people without just walking out your front door with a 12 gauge and random person shoots you. There are methods of dealing with other people that are not quite so direct.
Yeah, to be clear, everything we're talking about here is, intellectually or politically.
And this is definitely a thing the right needs to get over. I will say, though, to the federal thing, there is one thing of value, and it is very rare that we can do on the federal level. And it's not going to come up very often, and it's going to, you're basically going to have to set it up unto itself, and that is to say, whatever you think of this person individually, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene demonstrates pretty well that if you live in a district that's red enough, that is just not going to care what the left says, you can get up and say just about anything. And there is a simple reality that I have found when dealing with normies in particular, that they go, no one is doing any of this, and you go, well, that lady is. And then it's, oh my God, we're not alone. Yes, there's at least somebody. And it's nothing more than a recruiting tool, but that person will never get anything done legalistically. They're not going to pass the bill that bans the left or any other ridiculous idea. But it is helpful to have someone. The Marine Corps has the silent drill team. They're not out there winning wars, but they recruit like
Yeah.
bosses.
Yeah, no, I think they're, like I said, we're seeing a new crop of people in the conservative movement that I think are willing. They understand, it's some of them are a little closer to the knock, kind of your standard Fox News viewer. Some of them are a little further down the path, but many of them understand that kind of the National Review, Daily Wire version of conservatism is failing, and they're willing to start using language and taking positions. They're willing to be more aggressive on issues uh, that just would never have happened 10 years ago. It would have gotten you pretty much completely wiped out. And so I think that it is valuable that we're seeing that shift, not with just with her, but I think other candidates, other people in guys like Tucker Carlson in media. I know people have varying opinions on him as to whether he's really kind of backing the different or new right or whatever. But I
Nothing.
think
Hang on a second. Nothing
sure.
in the world has ever made me want to get a face tattoo until now. And I swear to God, the thing I want to get tattooed across my face is "Do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good."
Yeah.
Just so I don't have to say it every other minute.
No, 100%. That's one of the things that I certainly harp on. I think you do need standards. I think there are minimums you need to enforce. But I think that don't fail the friend enemy distinction.
Yeah.
Understand that you have to take victories, especially when you have such limited access to certain platforms, especially when you
Yeah.
have someone in those places and they're doing good work, even if you don't agree with them all the time. Don't be foolish enough to discard them.
Yeah, it's funny because the two people popular for this discussion right now, Tucker Carlson, I have plenty I disagree with the man on, but he is almost certainly a net positive. Nicki Minaj is not your friend.
Right. Yeah.
And it's fine. Never interrupt the enemy when they're making a mistake. Let her go fight the left. That's great. Have at it. Still not your friend.
Yeah, absolutely. I hate it when, especially with celebrities, people just go rushing to pick one of these people up and champion them, and absolutely, but let them fight, but understand that's the left fighting the left. This
Hmm.
person is not your new right wing champion. This is a left winger who doesn't care about a particular issue or isn't politically inclined enough to censor themselves on something, picking a fight with other leftists. It's
Yeah.
not it's not someone who's immediately on your side.
Exactly. And it's this seems very obvious to me, but I watch it happen every time. That idiot Silverman, right? Oh, maybe we should have a national divorce, and they can be first in America. Woo! Sarah Silverman's our friend. Are you high?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good transition because this will bring us into the next thing we were going to discuss. Because I've seen a lot more of this. I've seen some people get angry about it. I've seen some people in our sphere debating it, and so I wanted to pick your brain about it because I figured you were a good person, especially with your emphasis on localism. To kind of talk about this with. So obviously, it's not new to say something like eventually, pieces of the United States might spin off. We might see, things kind of breaking down. But you're seeing a lot of mainstream conservatives, guys like Matt Walsh at the Daily Wire, and a couple other of big commentators with big audiences start talking about like a national divorce, like just a voluntarily, taking the country and just kind of dividing it up and just making sure that before things get too crazy, you just kind of let people go their own way. And there's a lot of people who point out the obvious problems with this, like come on, like the federal government's never going to let that happen. Like we've seen this movie before. Um, B, your lines of disagreement are like through your states. It's the cities versus the suburbs and the rural parts, not state versus state. Like, yes, some states are red and some are blue, but if you break off certain states, they would have massive blue populations still in their metro areas and red populations in the rural areas. So you're not really doing anything unless you're going to have like some kind of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh partition where you move everybody of one belief system or another like forcibly into these states. And third, obviously, like when you divide Americans who fundamentally disagree with each other on basically everything and think the other side is evil into different states, that's probably not likely to de-escalate tensions. So I think all of those are reasonable, criticisms of the idea. But at the same time, I think there is some value in introducing it because even if it's not something that happens consciously, which I think is just as we might defund the Ford Foundation before we get to that. Like that's how likely I think it is. But
Yes.
but I think there is some value in talking about it because I think there is localism that could start to kind of separate different states from the federal apparatus in different ways. And even if we don't see like a hard break, we could see a slow deterioration of kind of the empire and the influence that we see from Washington D.C. on certain states as things become more difficult for them to manage as they kind of decline and individual states kind of set up ways to deal with these things on their own. I think we could see that as an avenue. But what do you think about this discussion with kind of the general conservatives, and then what do you think about its like viability in general?
It is good to see people who, let's be honest, 6 months ago would have called you every horrible name in the book for saying, maybe it's just time to be done with these people. It is nice to see them say, maybe we do this,
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, and this sort of goes to the first obvious complaint to this, which is to say that the feds will never let it happen. But it's bigger than that, right? The people that we're talking about, hey, I'll tell you what, why don't you go over there and I'll grill over here and we'll be good, have what, centuries, millennia of telling you that you wanting to go live a far right wing turbo evil life of having a wife, kids, a yard, a real job that you can get some life satisfaction in, and going to church at whatever basis that you normally go is indeed the thing that they hate. It is the thing that they must go after. You individually must live in the pod, eat the bug, and suck the dick, right? And so, as a fairly meta analysis of this, the idea that the people who intend to come down to you on an individual level and tell you that you have to do whatever crazy progressive thing or communist or call it whatever you want thing are going to leave you alone. Even let's say national divorce happens. Let's say we've got turbo right wing America and super gay America, and everybody is happy. The people that you're expecting to leave us alone are the ones who did the long march through the institutions, the ones who crossed the globe to come over here and promote all of this woke nonsense, left their lives behind, left everything they'd ever known behind, so they could come over here and destroy what was, to them, the ultimate enemy. And the premise that thousands of generations of that are suddenly going to be like, well, they drew a new border on the ground, so you know what? Never mind. I don't find a realistic idea.
Yeah, I think that's right, and yeah, that's I think that's a very valid criticism of even if you could convince the central government that this is the way to go, the idea that then that just solves the problem. I think is foolish because yeah, these people are not going to suddenly learn to stop and control themselves. They're not going to be like, oh well, now we can just turn inward and make a new and greater America, because that they didn't do that anyway, right? Like they're already incapable of solving these problems. That's one of the reasons they do what they do, because they generate new problems that they can solve with their magic regulations and stuff, even though again those are never actually solvable. The whole reason they created this apparatus of kind of the infinite self-licking ice cream cone is because they can't solve real issues. Like they can't fix infrastructure. They don't know what to do with the economy. They have no idea what to do with, like, establishing meaning in people's lives, so they don't just become either completely hedonistic or completely nihilistic. They don't know how to solve any of those issues, so they
I
manufacture the ones they're trying to solve today. And the idea that they're just going to turn internally and deal with their own issues once America piles into red and blue states, I think like you said, is foolish.
I don't think those are issues for them, right? And I think this is a mistake we make. Is that we look at this and we go, but life having meaning is important, right? So look at the things that the right wants to promote. Get a relationship with God if you don't have one. Get closer to God if you have a relationship. Have children. Have a meaningful impact in their lives so they grow up to have your values. On and on and on I could go. And the left says don't do any of that. Right? Really short, right? Do heroin. Some guy not too long ago got up on stage and said, "Well, I'm a recreational heroin user," and I was like, "Yeah, because that's a thing."
Yeah, from time to time.
Right? Yeah, I get home on a Tuesday night and I just do a bunch of heroin. Then I get up and go to work on Wednesday. Sure, you do. And this is a thing that we shouldn't mistake, right? They don't, when they go, when we say they have no solution to everyone devolving into nihilism, well, of course they don't. We of the right have no solution to people getting closer to God. Duh. We have no solution to good parenting. Well, no, and this is in the world of that friend enemy distinction. I'm sure there are good people who generally live good lives who vote badly or whatever. But I've been a registered Democrat since 1961. But on the other hand, I work in my community. I take care of the people around me. I do indeed try to raise my children to have good values. But yeah, my dad was a Democrat, so I'm a Democrat, right? Well, you're kind of an idiot, but you're not really a bad person. But that's not who we're talking about here. That's not the machine that is the left, right? Those people are bad people, not because they're inconsistent. They are horrifically consistent. And when I say horrifically consistent, I mean, look, if people were going around butchering children, not that that's happening in this country, you would say, you're a bad person. And if they came to you and said, well, my morality says we should butcher children, the answer would be, your morality is evil. And we just simply don't do that, right? And we mistake that they are actively bad people for everything that anyone, even vaguely on the right, would believe, right? And this is we keep looking for the Bond villain. Yes, Mr. Bond, I'm going to crash the moon into the earth and destroy humanity. That guy doesn't exist. And the guy that does exist is the one who says, well, if I just got everybody to live in a pod, not own anything, eat a bug, and they only had sex for raw enjoyment, so it doesn't matter if you're gay or you pretend you're a woman by putting on a dress and growing your hair out, that's everyone will be better off. And don't mistake this. This should have been the lesson of the communists, but we've all convinced ourselves that they were cynics. Right, that Stalin was just out for power. Oh no, that guy was a true believer, and that was the problem.
Yeah, I think I agree with most of that. We definitely have an issue where especially a lot of mainstream conservatives, are still thinking to themselves and this happens all the time. When we talk about wars and history, uh, you know, uh, people will say, "Oh, well, this one dictator or this one leader manipulated the people into doing all this awful stuff." Because it's really hard for us to grasp the idea that people have fundamentally different values than us. Like things that we think would be evil, they value. That's really hard for us to grasp and hard for us to admit, especially about people who are our neighbors, people who we thought of as our countrymen. And so I think especially people who grew up in 60s America, even 70s America, 80s America, they have a hard time looking at people and thinking that they have fundamentally different values. They always act like they're just one. If you can just ferret out a couple nefarious actors, then all these people will just flip back to their common sense. They'll return to their core beliefs as soon as that bad influence is gone. But I would say one thing that I would kind of disagree on there. I would say that it's also a mistake to pretend that the left doesn't want to pass on its values, or it doesn't want to perpetuate those things, that it doesn't have things that it wants to see in the future. I think the difference is because of the lifestyle and the different things they've chosen, they want to perpetuate them through your children or
Oh
through the
yeah.
children that they're importing into your country. They still have a very serious interest in what they think of as moral behavior. They just intend to make you and your children and the people they're bringing into the country, they want to compel them to adopt the value system rather than passing it on in the more traditionally genetic manner that you were explaining there.
Well, yeah, definitely. They learned a long time ago, and when I say a long time ago, you can hear Lenin talk about this. Going to people who have worked their entire lives, who have gone to church every week for the past 40 years, and being like, you know what, this God thing in work, that's for chumps. Those people come back to you and say things like, I've been doing this my whole life, and my life is better for it. Shut up, right? But if you go to the people, and this is the parallel between people you're importing and children, is that both groups come to you and say, all right, well, I guess I got to accept at least a little bit of whatever this society thing is to be able to live in it. And so at that point, they start force feeding the values, because anyone who has some of their own tells the left immediately, shut the hell up and go away. And they can't win that battle. They know it. And that's why, straight back to Lenin, you get, give me your children for, whatever he said, a couple of years, and I'll have them forever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think we both agree on kind of that issue, but what do you and kind of the unfeasibility of the of kind of the formal national divorce. But what do you think about a more regional kind of slow decay? Because a lot of empires, especially as they lose their luster, they lose their ability, their kind of their core bureaucracy rots out over history. A lot of them have maintained themselves in name, but they've lost regional power, right? And so you start having different kingdoms or different regions that were originally like directly under the control, might still be under their control in name, but because they've lost the ability to have the same reach and the same total control they used to, they kind of start letting those regions have more autonomy because they basically have to. They don't have the ability to manage them the way they used to. And so this is often how we see kind of empires slowly kind of fall apart, pieces kind of fall off on them, off of them, like they're still part of whatever the empire is in name, but they aren't really under the direct control the way they had been in the past. Do you see that gradual transition as something that could be in the future for America?
I think the left has learned historically substantially better than we have about this. Because what tends to happen in those scenarios historically is that the empire starts to fall apart, little pieces of it become much more autonomous, and then they are conquered instantly by the first thing that sees them as prey. The next rising empire. And if you want to, take a look at what that looks like, look around with all the China discussion we have. They're buying every house that is for sale in the country. They're invested in companies. They are developing their own military to the point where they could replace the U.S. military, or at least they're trying. They're not very good at it, but they are trying. And I think that's much more of what we'd be looking at. I will grant that if any of the maps that I semi-regularly publish, the right-wing states are together and they say, that's it. We are, DC no longer has capability to control us. However that happens, the military degrades into a bunch of crying children, and the states just go, well, look, I'm not paying your stupid Fed taxes anymore. Though, again, I think they've learned there because I know you can't say this without everybody reeing, but the fascistic practice of the federal government being in bed with corporate entities means that even as the states try to oppose them, they not only have to oppose DC, they have to oppose every corporate entity that exists. Means that it's going to be harder to get the octopus off, right? It no longer has 8 arms, it has 800 or 8 million, whatever the corporate count in the U.S. is. And that by itself, while the federal government may not have the sway to come down to, I don't know, Texas or whatever, Wyoming, and say, you're going to do woke nonsense. That's not even what we're seeing. Look at Biden with the vaccine mandates. He didn't go down to the states and say, you have to enforce this. He said, dear OSHA, go down to businesses and tell them that if they don't do it, we're going to go after them. The states were in irrelevancy here. And the only pushback that you see is DeSantis and his, look, if you do any of this, then I am coming after you. And even on that, it's been pretty weak, so I don't know how the fight's going to actually go. But I'd be willing to bet money that Walmart's answer is going to be, well, we're not fighting the federal government, so to hell with you, DeSantis.
Yeah, easier to fight Florida than DC. But I guess, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that the extra governmental apparatus that supports the regime makes it much harder than it used to be because states are so interconnected economically that like you said, even if one was able to somehow basically kind of create, if you got the Dominion of Florida or something coming out, you would still have all the corporations that are under the sway of kind of the American government, and they would be pushing similar things inside, which is one of the reasons that if Republicans have any hope, which I don't think they do, but if they have any hope, they need to discard their fondness for corporations very quickly. But I think there's also a part of this, and again, it's always difficult to predict the future. But I think part of this is also we have supply lines stretched out really far, right? Basically we have shaved like every single inch of reliability off of our economic and kind of supply system so that we can create maximum like profit and drive down costs and everything, which makes it very fragile. At some point, with the collapse of competency in central government and the stretching of supply lines, reality kicks in, right? Like at some point you pay a price. It may be very far down the road. It might be 50 years from now. It might be 100. But there is a limit to how incompetent you can make your bureaucracies and how unreliable you can make logistics before something serious breaks. And when that does happen, then you might see more of these regions gain autonomy because nobody can rely on the central apparatus the way they used to.
You're sort of seeing the beginnings of that right now. I have people sending me, videos of Walmart shelves are empty. This is the same discussion as DeSantis and Abbott buying whatever the hell that treatment was.
Oh, the yeah, for the coof. Yeah.
And that's the feds doing what we would generally call incompetence, but I will happily every day of the week call maliciousness.
Oh, it's absolutely malicious, 100%.
And this is the, none of that would be possible without all of this bureaucratic supply line issue, right? And this is the beginning, right? It's why I concentrate no small part of my life on not having to care about this is what it comes down to. But at the same time, what we're going to likely see as this happens is a very quick centralizing of power. And you can see the beginnings of that already, too. Because this is the left's playbook throughout all of history is, talking about it earlier, create problem. Oh, look, I have a solution to the problem, and the problem is more leftism, and somehow that doesn't work. So, I got a solution to that problem, too, and who knew it was more leftism? And so if you look to the leftist of the past, they will happily inform you that what happens when their stupid policies go entirely off the rails is they start seizing greater control of everything and then trying to inflict more leftism on this. And the stories of this are great and small, but they are everywhere to be found. To the point where there's a ridiculous story that Soul tells that came out of the Soviet Union in which a guy was trying to get a tractor to plow his field, and he went to the distributor, and the distributor said, well, I've got tractors, but they're supposed to have green paint on them, and all I have is red. And this goes all the way up the chain of command to Stalin before somebody just says, so just put red paint on it, right?
Yeah, right. And that's what I'm saying is eventually, vicious levels of incompetence and that kind of thing. But it can go on for a very long time before that price eventually comes due. The things can limp along for a long time, and people can still have to live under a generation or more of this, before things like that really cost the regime. So something that might be out there somewhere in the future, but probably not something immediate, in the near future. Though I do have people who make I guess you could call them either more optimistic or pessimistic predictions, depending on how you look at it. And I'm always surprised when they think it's a shorter timeline. But the last thing I wanted to talk to, because we are getting close to an hour here, and guys, if you have any questions for Don or myself, go ahead and get those lined up, because we're going to move on to our last topic here, because I don't want to keep everybody too late. But Don, you're somebody with military experience. How long were you in the military?
6 years.
Okay, so Don's somebody who's familiar with kind of the inner workings of the military, and obviously something that I don't think gets talked about anywhere near enough is just uh, the complete takeover of the military, by kind of woke ideology, the purging of the military by the Biden administration, the indoctrination that's happening now, and people who were in the know, people who knew people in the military knew this was going on. I think your boomer conservatives thought that the military is always just a stalwart right wing organization because it's just made up of too many good old boys, to ever fall. But I think people who are familiar, I've got a number of friends in the military, and they've been, taking, basically CRT and gender studies classes in the military for a very long time at this point.
Oh, yeah.
We're starting to see the outward manifestations of that, right? It's now becoming very clear. We're starting to see very political persecutions in the military. We're seeing officers, we're seeing top level generals, Mark Milley coming out and talking about white rage, a week before like Afghanistan just collapses and kills a bunch of soldiers and embarrasses the United States nationally. We're seeing kind of that woke incompetence topple into the mainstream. The really big one, I think, probably in the last couple of weeks is I think it's a lieutenant colonel who he was the guy who spoke up against
Scheller.
yes, Scheller, who spoke up against the top brass, and he didn't just lose his commission and his pension and everything. He's in jail right now without any specific charges. He's just, which last I checked, was a violation of the Constitution. Not that that shocks me, but someone should probably care in the Republican Party, and no one seems to. But what do you think that people don't understand about what's going on with the military? What should people on the right be looking at there?
Uh, in really, really short, I guess this is beyond not new. Nearly everybody I know who in my lifetime has been in the military was not surprised by this. I still keep in contact with a lot of guys that I was in with, and I happenstancely met. I think he was a master gunnery sergeant when he retired, and I'm sure that doesn't mean anything to anybody but me, but it means he was in for 20 plus years, and he got out, well, 10 years ago now, right? So this is the timeline that you're talking about. It's 90s to mid 2000s. And he talks pretty religiously about how, and he was a Marine, talks about how the Marine Corps has just progressively more over time. It's been a problem since he was in. You are a yes man, shut up, dick sucker, make it happen, or the Marine Corps doesn't want you. And now it has just exploded to a size that people who are not Marines understand. And this is not new. I had this problem when I was in. I semi-regularly tell a story that, go find the channel. You'll find it almost immediately, I'm sure, of a lieutenant who wanted to do stupid things with artillery on American soil that was going to kill Marines. And while no one came to me in that exact moment and said, hey, you stopped him from killing Marines on American soil, so screw you, it was pretty obvious that I was not a friend of the command afterwards. And that was 2011. This is the game and how it's played in the military. And if you think it is that new, go back and read the book on Chesty Puller, who got he is the most venerated, most decorated Marine in all of history, and he fought in Korea and Vietnam, and he was not political. That guy just fought wars. Whatever you've heard about professional officers who all they really did was fight America's wars and take care of their troops, that's who Chesty Puller was. And he talks about how big of a problem this was and how political it was. And if that's not far enough back, everyone and their brother has heard of War as a Racket and Smedley Butler. He talks about how political everything was and how serious of a problem this was. And we just gloss over this like, it'll be fine. But the thing that is really going to cause the problem that I don't think anybody understands, and you could see this, anyone who's been in the military has seen this, officers will come down with the dumbest ideas that you've ever heard of. Ideas that people who have never been in the military would think, why would you do any of that? And as long as you have guys who are willing to be hard asses, guys who are, going home, lifting weights, drinking beer, singing the national anthem just because, jumping off of buildings. And by the way, these are all things that actually happened in the military, at least once upon a time, getting in bar fights, etc. Those guys are going to take the stupidest idea ever and do as much as they can outside the idea, but make it happen. And so as they go after lower and lower ranks, as they start enforcing this woke nonsense further and further down, there will be a very quick crash of the military. You can find any officer in the world. In fact, go back and listen to any speech from any officer. NCOs are the backbone of the U.S. military. Those are guys who are just doing the job. Okay, apparently we got to do 87 classes in sharp training, which is the original woke, well, probably not even original, but early on woke nonsense of, sexual harassment craziness. in the military. And okay, fine, we got to do this. All right, everybody into the room. We're going to do this in one day. And then you know what we're going to do? We're going to go back to running, shooting, making sure that we are the toughest fighting force that has ever existed on planet Earth. And when those guys stop caring about the fighting part and only care about whether or not your woke gender studies major is offended by whatever they said, it's over.
Well, you'll start seeing those guys bounce out, but they're going to get replaced by somebody, right? It's going to be someone significantly less competent. But there's, especially, you've got a crashing economy, you got a large number of people coming into the country without work. I mean, the military becomes an attractive option for a lot of those people at some point, right? And so I think you'll always have a supply of men who can't find work somewhere else. But I think you'll just see a, like you said, drop in the number who are of people who used to be, maybe made of tougher stuff, who would occupy those situations, and you're bringing in people with maybe a lower level of competence or a low level of aptitude.
So there's a thing in the Marine Corps, and it starts on day one. No sweat, no sweat. Doing my 10%. Right, and this is a thing that you're saying out loud when you have failed at something. And the premise of this is 10% of any organization sucks, and it's just the bottom 10%. Even if they're not particularly bad, they're not as good as the rest of the organization, so they're holding it back. Right, and yes, this is just yet another example of the Pareto distribution, but the difference here will come when it's no longer 10% are holding it back, even so much as 50, and you just simply can't carry the weight. It becomes too much of a problem. I talk pretty regularly with a guy named Dale Comstock. He was a Delta Force operator, and he has this story about he was out in some country somewhere, and he goes cruising past, he's driving somewhere, and he goes cruising past this convoy that's on the side of the road with a bunch of guys sitting under a tree and a smoking Humvee out in the middle of nowhere. And he stops and he says, "What the hell is this?" And they said, "Well, it's really hot outside, so despite that we have casualties over there in that Humvee, we're not going to go get them because it's too hot." And so he and his guys went and got them. And that right there is absolute summary of how bad this can get. Because if we required Delta Force operators to go out and get the wounded, man, there's just not that many of them. They don't, everything's done with special forces now. That's nice. You still got to have a guy with a gun who does the military thing outside of all your special forces guys.
And you're aggressively bouncing, the population of those guys out. So you're degrading even the quality of those forces in the process. But yeah, I think this just kind of goes to the crumbling institutions and bureaucracy in general, right? That's just the American military is another unfortunate victim of this process. And like you said, you're just going to see a rotten efficiency. But I do think you are seeing more and more conservatives understand that shift is occurring, and maybe the military isn't their natural friend, or at least what's going to become the military in the next decade might not be their natural friend. But I still think that's a hard thing for a lot of people to look at. You know what I mean?
Well, there's a strange, I don't know if it's strange, but it is to most people, thing that is happening where 10 years ago, even when I got out of the Marine Corps, and I got out for a lot of very political nonsense reasons, I still would have told guys, look, man, if you want to go, go. Understand that there's going to be a lot of stuff that's political and nonsense, and you're not going to like it. But if nothing else, you have spent 4 years with Marines, and to this day, I miss being around Marines, and I will tomorrow, right? Because the Marines that I was, when I spent my time in, were, generally speaking, a bunch of guys who were out there doing hard-ass things. Generally speaking, were out there, doing man-land things, and it was great. If I could have got rid of the entire officer corps, I'd have stayed in the Marine Corps forever. Probably still be there right now. But you can't. And so, look, at the end of the enlistment, you're going to have to figure out whether or not you want to stay. And at this point, I tell people not to join. And I am not alone by far. Um, you know, there is a very large number of vets. It's not post Vietnam where it was just, 20 hippies who were like, man, the American military sucks, bro. It's just like, I just wanted to stay home and smoke pot. It's not that anymore. The guys that you really want saying, go join the military, are the guys who are saying, don't do it. And that's getting to be a big deal.
Yeah, my friends who are in or have recently gotten out say very much the same thing. Often they're even more aggressive about it. They'll just tell me, "Hey, man, everything you think that's going on, like everything that you talk about, the kind of corrupting and stuff and these influences, it's all way worse than you think."
Oh yeah.
Like it's all like, even as like as pessimistic as people will call you, and that kind of thing, there you are vastly underestimating who's running these things and how ideological they are and what kind of ridiculous nonsense is being instituted. Like, whatever you think is being pushed, turn double it, because
Oh
it's
yeah.
that bad. And they say the same thing, like, I would never tell anyone to go in at this point.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that comes with a cost eventually.
they're hell with it. Brief story time with Dawn. So when I was enlisted, I was in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, which is sort of over there on the coast where all those bases are, right? And we would go to Bragg twice a year, and Bragg is just a little bit inland. And the reason for that is they had a bigger artillery impact area, so you could shoot more and do crazier stuff. And the rules from the moment I got there were, when you go to Bragg, there's no brass around, so we can actually get around to being Marines, which often meant you were getting your ass kicked, right? And that was the Marine Corps. That's how it was. Look, no, you don't get to just be angry guy from Marine Corps movie number 7 that you watched when officers are around, because they're a bunch of Karens. But once they're not watching, the game is on. And keep in mind that this was 10 to 15 years ago. And that's already a little bit too far. Officers should, if you don't like how it is that you keep enlisted hard, look away. But fine, that was the game. No one's watching, right? And by the time I got out, there's a thing that I'm sure all of you have heard of in some fashion. It's called a ranger grave. For the vast majority of you, it's a hole that's about, I don't know, 18 to 20 inches deep, and it's got a little berm around it, and you sleep in it, right? You've seen it in war movies and what have you. And this thing unironically saves your life. In fact, I am here today because I dug one of these. And that is just a fact. There is no two ways around it. And I went my last brag in the Marine Corps. I had a guy who was, Corporal, I'm going on a deployment. And somehow or another it came up that he didn't know what this thing was, right? And so I said, okay, we're going to go dig one right now so you know what the hell you're doing, because whether or not you're an idiot, it's my job to keep you alive. And I walk him out to the tree line to go dig one of these things, and somebody comes by and goes, that's hazing. And I went, how is this hazing? He's not in trouble. He needs to learn something. This is the very definition of my job, is to teach my junior Marines something that will keep them alive in combat. That's what I do. And I got told, doesn't matter, it's hazing. And I got told later that happened because a sergeant major, again, guy who's been in the Marine Corps for a long time, came by and said, hey, why is that Marine digging over there? I think that's hazing. And he did that because he was there with a colonel who went, why are Marines digging? Marines shouldn't have to dig. And I went, that's it. I'm getting out of here. I am not going to watch guys that I have to lead into combat get ripped to pieces because you idiots don't think that literal life-saving things are a good idea. To hell with this. I'm leaving.
Yeah, can't do basic combat training because the optics might be bad for whatever political appointee happens to be walking by.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, we're coming up on an hour here, so let me check. I think we did get a super chat here from Polish Ambassador. for 25. I'm assuming that's something in Polish. Thank you very much for your donation. It won't solve itself. Magic Market Daddy won't come for us, so that's certainly true. Using reactionary lessons to cure conservatives can't help. Do controlled demolition. So, what do you think that conservatives can learn? Do you think that the mainstream can whatever we want to call these lessons that we're talking about here, do you think that the general mainstream conservative opinion can be shifted in a more advantageous direction, or do you think that's just a lost cause?
Uh, sort of. you
Yeah.
know, it. There is no time ever, no matter what happens, in which Mitch McConnell will come out and go, you know what? It turns out I've been wrong about everything. That day is not coming, and if that is what you're hoping for, stop now. However, there are going to be, is Matt Gaetz somewhat pliable? Yeah, but this comes down to two soul quotes in a stream. I'm going to get accused of being a libertarian or something. Soul got asked in an interview once why he doesn't try and talk Al Sharpton out of being a race baiting lunatic, and he said, "Al Sharpton makes 100 times per year what I do. I don't think it should be my job to try and talk a guy out of a 7-figure income. I don't think it's going to work out well for me." And keep that in mind, because for all of your super mainstream righties, that's what you're dealing with, right? Dear Ben Shapiro, stop making, a couple $1,000,000 a year, right? Dear Ben Shapiro, stop creating this media empire that not only is giving you money, but all of this self-important power nonsense that you very clearly need for whatever reason. How am I going to do that? Well, Ben, it turns out on a principled level, if you just gave up everything and started doing the right thing, you too could have a YouTube channel that can't get past 11,700 subscribers.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point that a lot of people don't think about, right? There's we look at media figures and we frustratingly say, we look at them and we're frustrated and say, how can they not get this? How can they not understand that they're just running in a hamster wheel? How can they not understand that the tactics or the approaches or the ideologies that they're using can't yield victory? And the easy answer is they're not looking for victory, they're looking for a paycheck. And there's way more money and way more prestige. You can still get invited to a lot of nice parties and live in a very nice house and get really good book deals, as long as you play inside, if you color inside the lines.
Yeah,
If you just play heel to the regime, and you just kind of adopt the opinions that are kind of drawn and outlined for you to hold as someone in the loyal opposition, as opposed to, like you're saying, well, or you could just abandon that couple $1,000,000 and go make a couple $100 on YouTube if you could manage to keep your channel monetized.
right.
It's not exactly a hard choice for most mainstream conservative voices.
And to give you a decent parallel between myself and Shapiro, I lived in California and I wanted out. And it took me multiple years to move to the Midwest and not have to live in the hellhole that is California. Shapiro woke up one day and went, I'm moving the whole company. And he was gone in like a week.
Yeah.
you know? It's hard to give up, regardless of what you're doing, hard to give up all of that and move down to I am but one of the plebs. And doing it for effectively nothing, because let's face it, we of the salesmen of this might lead to victory in some real way are also the same guys over here going, yeah, victory is probably not on the table anytime soon, possibly
Right.
not within your lifetime, right?
No, absolutely, but we still do see, I think, some of that shift. I think that the old conic messages are wearing out. I think you do see some of the places like the Claremont Institute and a few others in the conservative sphere that have some connection back to like think tanks and donors and things, reaching out to people that they never would have before, because there's just nothing left. Like the Sean Hannitys are not going to make it. That you
Yeah.
can sell pocket catheters for another decade, to the last generation that's going to believe that stuff. But once they're gone, you're going to need something else. Even if you're controlled opposition, you're going to need a new message because the old one just doesn't work anymore. And so I think there will be a shift. It's not going to be the one we want to see. It's not going to be as far. It's not going to be necessarily where we want it to go. But I think you will see, and we already are seeing, the mainstreaming of some of the ideas and some of the issues that we talk about into the conservative spheres. If that, whether that actually goes anywhere or those things just get co-opted into the controlled opposition is hard to say at this point. But I think there is some shift, even though that might not in and of itself be a plan. That's probably not where you want to put your money, is that the major right-wing consensus will shift in a certain direction that will free everything up.
I mean, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
there's this Overton window discussions, right? So Shapiro is I think a perfect example for this, because he, generally speaking, runs. It's not comedy, but it's infotainment at best. Go look at all those Shapiro reacts videos that he's putting out every other minute now, right? And it's just him like, oh my God, guys, this is so ridiculous, right? And it's feel good, brief nonsense with some hypothetical attachment of analysis. And maybe he is just smarter than all of us, and he's substantially more based. I don't believe that, but maybe that's what he's doing. Is as long as I can carve this into the Overton window, I can move slowly over that direction. Again, I don't believe this, but I think it's a thing that the rest of us need to learn from, right? Because I hate it with a white-hot rage. I hate this jokey, garbage, infotainment nonsense. But look around you. We're dealing with a society that ads are needing to get down to 15 seconds or less because no one can pay any attention to an advertisement about the new consume item that they need to go get. Attention spans are not growing, so when we sit here and have, as we are, and again, I am as guilty of this as anybody, an hour-long discussion about in-depth, high-level things. Yeah, us marginally autistic people are all here, and we're like, yes, let's do more of this, and that's it. That's where we end. We've got nothing bigger to reach for, nothing that will be within any capability of ours. So,
No, I think that's true, and I guess it becomes a question of how much reaching a mass audience is the key. I mean, it's part of the process at some point, but it might not be the linchpin early on. And to do the things you're talking about would require the level of funding that someone like Shapiro or much more than that gets, which is why you hear so many people talking about the possibility of counter elites or people who see the system breaking down and know it needs to go a different way, even if all they're looking to do is make money. They're staring into the face of a system that's simply not going to allow them to do that in a certain amount of time. But of course, that sometimes that can feel like waiting for Caesar or whatever. It can feel like a holding pattern because when does this switch actually flip? When do you see this happen? It probably goes into effect at some point, but that doesn't mean it has to be anytime soon.
I'm not sure that it ever goes into effect, honestly. I mean, I'm pretty notorious for saying no one is coming to save you, because no one is. Look at the right's various love affairs with all of these rogue elites that were going to come save us. How's super based Elon Musk doing today?
Right. Yeah.
Is he cucking wildly, or is he still super based? Because you follow that guy for a while and you find out that on Monday he's based and on Friday he's cucked. I don't know, there was a brief love affair there with Peter Thiel. How's that going?
Actually, I'm secretly funded by Peter Thiel, according to Twitter. So
I believe that.
Yeah.
So at least we're getting something out of this.
When I Scrooge McNuck my way through my vault of money, it's all worth it.
Yeah, I that is important, right? Because my yacht with my private lake in the backyard is indeed funded by right wing Turbo Soros, whose name I can't even say.
Well, at some point, they catch you with scandalous photos of the yacht, and you have to drop the pleb. It's a lie. It's all been a lie. Um, great shame. But yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. There's always this person on the horizon who will realize that the system is coming apart in the seams, and starts then starting to back all the new based institutions and media outreach and everything. But that can, like so many of the things, that can just be a holding pattern that may or may not pay off for a lot of people. And so I definitely understand the frustration with that approach as well.
It is worth noting that we shouldn't necessarily just overtly hate these people just because, right?
Right, right.
If someone is doing something positive for you, let them keep doing it. But that this is not the same as they're going to, come and save you. And the idea, I'm going to open up a giant can of worms. But the idea that we're going to have rogue elites, I think, is fallacious. Look at what happens, back to way earlier in the stream. Nicki Minaj stepped out on one thing, and that machine turned on in 5 seconds. And we don't have somebody who is multi-millionaire, 10 years of the machine liking you. And look at the other people who have stepped out. Jesse Ventura is a lunatic, but the machine liked him just fine until he was. And then all of a sudden he was a crazy person who should never be trusted. And now he is not anywhere near what he was when he was in wrestling, for example. He is not on every television station if he feels like it. And for those of you who are, those of us, I guess, who are old enough to have watched this transition through the 90s, they're simply not going to let it happen. And you're not going to end up with actual elites. You're going to end up with people who are what all of us are. And so if a guy with, that puts out 20 videos a month with 10, 20, 50,000 subscribers is the elite that you're hoping for, then you got it. Ready, go. Vanguard, begin.
Well, I will say this, because I do agree with, in the current situation, the outcomes are a lot of what you're talking about there. But one thing I do try to avoid is, I think there's some name of the official fallacy in case you're trying to be like the amazing atheist or something. But there's like the continuation fallacy, like just assuming that whatever is happening now will go on forever because it's just been going on for a long time. Um, and it's tempting because we are in what has been a long run of successes for the left, and a long kind of a long march through a lot of humiliating stuff, as they pretty much win at every turn, and they always seem to crush the opposition. It always gets co-opted, something always happens to it. It always ends up getting destroyed. It is tempting to get fatalistic and say, like, well, there's just, no one's ever going to break through, no one's ever going to come in and change things. No, nothing about this will just continue because these people can always just crush their enemies. But I think, you know, I don't think history is the history of the bad guys always winning. And that's not to say that you should just assume that you're going to win because you're on the right side. That's not how anything works. But I do think that the idea that this is the one regime that lasts forever. This is the one empire that just persists, no matter how corrupt, no matter how degenerate, no matter how out of touch reality, no matter how much it deteriorates. This is the one that just goes on and crushes its enemies in perpetuity. I think there is also a failure of understanding and imagination in that approach too.
I don't think that's the case, and that is good criticism, right? And certainly, the I forget, Jesse Kelly, I think, does this all the time. Michael Malice does this all the time. You know, being black pilled to the point where we can't do anything means these people are unstoppable. And it's some video of someone being an idiot, right? And that is not what's going to stop us. What's going to stop us is that we are always looking, lacking a better example for Jesus. You know, and the right does this with everything, right? So this guy who is doing, I don't know, take a look at Alex Jones, right? Because just because he's such a good example, whatever you think of the man, Alex Jones is too over the top. Alex Jones had a divorce and family issues, and so can't take care of a family. Alex Jones, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't matter what arena you're looking at for the right. As soon as someone who comes up who might fit the bill, and I'm not saying we should all just, get in cars and follow Alex Jones everywhere, but put in whoever you want here for whatever your pet project is, right? The thing you find most important. Someone has risen in that arena who could be the guy, right? And the first thing we do is track down every flaw that he's ever had. Back in the 4th grade, he got a D, as though we like public school, and that is indicative of anything. But it's the first thing you'll hear, right? Oh, he got an A in Spanish and a D in English, and therefore what we know is that he's cucked on immigration. Like, whoa, I don't think that's what we know because of that. But that's what you'll hear, right? We rip down our elites as fast as we can. And it's not the left doing it, it's us. And we refuse to follow anyone who has any issue of any variety, which is what leads me to say that the only example is Jesus. Because that's who you had better be if you want to get up and be a rogue elite for the right. Anything shy of that, and the first people you'll have to deal with are the right. There is no... well, look, this man isn't perfect, but he's doing the right thing. There's none of that. We instantly destroy these people, and that is the thing that is going to keep the left winning, right? It's not that they are some competent, turbo, amazing rulers. It's that we refuse to do anything about it for a ton of reasons.
Well, at some point, you have to become more competent, right? Like that's it. And if you're tearing down any progress you make at any turn internally, then well, at the end of the day, then you end up deserving to lose to people who even are doing what they're doing. But that said, now that we've bolstered the spirits of everyone in the audience, probably going to go ahead and wrap it up. It went longer than I expected, but it's always a great time talking to you, man. We always have an interesting discussion, so I'm very glad that you came on. And guys, if you're not following Don on Twitter, you're not subbed on YouTube or his other platforms, I've got those in the description, so make sure that you're checking him out. Thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I love talking to you. And you know what? The time thing, I seem to recall we've always had this problem. Yeah, we'll go for an hour.
I think you're right. Yeah.
It's been 90 minutes.
I think we, the last couple of times, we're like, yeah, we'll go for an hour. And then we stretching into almost 2 hours every time. So, but right kind of problem. Like, I think we're always hitting on topics that, like I said, because we have like similar directions we're going. And we're kind of, we're friendly and allied, but we're always coming from different directions. It's always worth hashing it out because I think it brings a little bit of each perspective, and so it always makes for a good conversation. But thanks everybody for joining us. Like I said, make sure to check out all of Don's stuff, and as always, we'll talk to you next time.